Well, welcome again to another session of the 15th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment virtual conference. I'm Bob Hales. I'm your moderator. Don't forget, right after this, the Wall Street Journal has another session. If you have a few minutes to join, it'd be nice. Our session today, as you can see, is Conversation Cafes, student to student course interactions. We have with us Amy Dye Reeves. She's an associate librarian within the Texas Tech University Libraries. She's the liaison with the College of Education and Department of History. And she provides information, literacy, instructional sessions, and workshops. And Amy, you're going to tell us all about student to student course interactions.
Yes, I am. Thank you all so much for having me here today. Like I said, my name is Amy Dye Reeves, and so I'm going to show you real quickly. This is my contact information here. I have a QR code, but this is my email address, my phone number as well to schedule an appointment with me if you need any help. So really today, what we're going to focus on is that student to student interaction, as well as talking about faculty interaction as well. We're going to start with a pre-assessment question just to kind of get you all started. We're going to learn about new techniques, the application of new techniques, things that are happening, what works, what doesn't work, and really any concerns you have about really conversations with students as well as faculty members. So one of the first things I like to ask people is when you're working with online discussions, just kind of think in your mind, what does that look like to you? Can you describe what you're feeling and experiencing in 3 words? Oftentimes when I'm working with students and I ask this question, what does online discussion look like to you? A lot of times people say it's frustrating, it's busy work, it's conversations that aren't really fruitful to me. And they often just feel like it's just not a good discussion. And so I always want to think, okay, how can I facilitate better discussion based on those kind of frustrations? So hopefully those things don't look like that for you all. Hopefully that's a better discussion that will come out of that. So when I start with looking at new discussions every semester, I look at the community of inquiry framework. I'm not sure how much you all have dealt with that before, but what that is, it really represents a process of creating a deep and meaningful, collaborative, constructive learning experience, really looking at social, cognitive, and really a focus on that teaching presence. So when I think about all those connected together, the social, the cognitive, and teaching presence, those all go together, especially when you're looking at creating those research questions there. So you start with that social presence. How do you correspond with your students? Are you oftentimes just asking them to do a discussion board post and maybe have 2 or 3 people just respond to that? Is that a fruitful conversation? Is it really purposeful, really full of purpose? Is it a trusting environment? Are you developing those interpersonal relationships? And are you thinking about them as different types of learners? Because a lot of people, even if you have the written discussion board post, that may not be everyone's strength. So think about universal design and think about what are some alternatives I can help with a social presence, maybe creating a video interactive that they could create a video and then interact with another student, and they can upload that into Blackboard or Canvas or whatever LMS that you're using. But what is some different ways to create conversations? And I'm also going to show you a way that I do things using Jamboards through social presence in the classroom. And that's going to be towards the end of our session today, more examples of what I do. That cognitive is always really important, right? So we're looking at constructing and confirming really that meaningful content throughout the course. What am I trying to conduct? What are some meaningful cognitive presence that I have with my class? And what are some learning objectives that are meaningful, but how can they achieve that every single time in the classroom? And again, it's that teaching presence that we have that we're working on today. We're working on that social presence and meaning with that cognitive, but as a teacher, we're looking at those meaningful ways and those learning outcomes to make it all worth it in the end. So that way, when they complete a particular module, or even just the session for today that you have like face-to-face, what are some things that they're going to come out with and that are meaningful from that session, and just not making it just a filter session that's like, okay, I'm just going to be able to go ahead and I have all these learning objectives, but they don't remember them at the end of class, right? So what do you want to come away with them that they can know going into the next session, or just in life in general? Like, what are some skills that you might would have? It could be note taking. I actually work a lot with my students on note taking because I've noticed when they come to college, they have some difficulty with note taking. So we actually do an exercise going back and forth, having conversations about what does note taking look like for you? So I do a lot of sessions on that as well. But first, I kind of start with looking at having this dialogue in the classroom. So first, you're establishing the opportunity to have authentic engagement from the moment the classroom starts, right? So I'm looking at a bit of literature, and really, I looked at Christopher 2015, which I can also give you that information as well. That particular research looked at the following of online interaction, but also applying that to in-person classroom. And this particular research, they looked at greeting each student virtually. So they would come on to a Zoom session and say, hey, Eugene, how are you doing today? How are things going in your classes? You know, are you having any difficulty, learning the material, just kind of having that great interaction, but also just paying attention to how you're doing, just checking in with them throughout the class, because sometimes when you're in a Zoom session, you may, or they may have the camera turned on or maybe have it turned off. So it's also kind of good to know that there's those aha moments that you're actually presenting with them as well. I also do asynchronous classes using PlayPosit. So, and I actually have that technology as well, but I really, love to get them excited to engage. A lot of times I have a question that starts out the class. And one of the ones I love to start with them is, what is your favorite candy? And there is students that will fight on that. They're like, what do you mean you don't like Twizzlers? I love Twizzlers, or, I love this other candy. How do you not like that? And so that actually, facilitates conversations on just, everyday types of conversations with each other, but it also makes it more meaningful. So when they're going through the conversation in class, they're actually going to have a more fruitful conversations based on that feedback that you're giving them. That can even be nonverbals. That can be like, that's, it's great, and just having them go on and have more discussion, or like, hey, we might want to pause, a little bit for a second. So I do hand motions as well with them, especially through their chat boxes, and just stopping periodically if they have any questions. It's just being intentional with your goals from that dialogue. What is being realistic or unrealistic at that point? I'm allowing them to have those ground rules, I think, is important. I talk with them every semester about being civil with each other, that we are working together for one common good for the class. Not everybody's going to agree with everybody on every single point, but having those set of ground rules can be really important, especially when you're having a class that is very focused on discussions. And really that continuous dialogue, I really looked at additional research that really focused on the foundation of communication, and that active learning, that active listening, listening to understand, but not only just to automatically respond, having them have a question, and then for me pausing and thinking that through, and not automatically giving them an answer, but that gives me think time, but also models to show them that you don't have to know everything right off the bat really fast. Having that think time is really important. Sometimes you have students who are quiet, and so this takes a lot for them to get out of their comfort zone and sharing that time with you. And really, I have a safe space with them that's confidentiality. So whatever stays, stays in the room, especially those opinions, and not having like consequences, but still having that shared space and opportunity, but also it being fair to what the guidelines are within the university as well for conversations that we would have. Because again, not everybody's going to agree on everything, but we are going to come to a common agreement that we are going to be civil with each other. And everybody has different levels of understandings. I start a lot of times with my students, making these I statements. I think this, my experience is that. Not saying those people, they, really using a type of language that is very vague, really avoiding that vulgar type language as well, because it can get heated with some conversations. So it's just working with them to have that feeling when things are being comfortable with the dialogue. Allowing your students to have those difficult conversations, giving students that opportunity to be more reflective with communications. I also look at a lot of research in terms of just having those conversations that often don't stop, but giving them an opportunity to have action steps and learning through the process. I know you have your hand up. I'll get it towards the end, I promise. I promise. Giving that opportunity to follow up with them if they have any questions. Just, asking them, what is the readings that's new information for you? What do you find confusing or surprising? What is this challenge you're thinking, or even beliefs as well? And how do you challenge those beliefs? I like to do interacting asynchronously. If you do that as well, I have a lot of students who are in different places. China, I have ones that are in California. I'm based in Texas. So, really having them have a article that you're having them read for class, or a chapter, and then they can record their thoughts through a video and then have somebody respond to that. But that can be student to student interaction. I'm also going to show you as well as what I do for a Jamboard activity with students. So that's something that I also like to show really different ways students can interact, as well as, those reflective questions. How do you normally expect students to interact with you in a face-to-face course? Is that the same interactions that you're wanting them to have in the virtual environment? What activities have been really the most beneficial to you in face-to-face, and can you transition that to online classes? What I also do, I'm always looking for new technologies to use, and really looking at these digital annotation tools. There's VoiceThread, LiveMargin, eComma. All these ones really have this digital annotation, and really that requires them to actively look at a text and then interact with that through verbal means. So if you ever use any of these, this might be another way to interact with your students, especially if you have an article or a book chapter. They can go ahead and annotate that and really talk about how they feel on a particular issue or course content. Another way to do this, a lot of people I use Play Pose It, but I know people also use Top Hat or Active Learning. And really what that is that's really creating those interactive texts. Could be a quiz, it could be a short answer, a long answer. A lot of people have this. I know we have this, and we have Top Hat really with us within Texas Tech, but it has those interactive texts, using those quiz tools, anything you might want to use as well. So I'm sure a lot of you are using that. I also use graphic organizers and visual note-taking. I'm really big, especially on my freshman students, because they don't always have the note-taking skills coming into college. So since this is a freshman level class I teach a Library 1100, and is just a general library course that talks about learning how to create a research question, locating resources, how to really take things that are fake news versus news for research. And so it's really important that when I'm walking through them to have a graphic organizer. Where are they starting? What is their starting point with using library resources? For example, have they used library resources at a public library? Have they used that in a school library? And then they start having this like graphic organizer of like this little thought bubbles. Okay, I started here, but maybe there's some other places in the library I can look. Who can I talk to the library who can help me develop these research questions and so forth. I use that also with Venn diagrams, and just kind of shows that powerful interaction of a visual where I'm at and where do I want to be. And really the sketch notes also help as well when you're having those like graphic organizers. I also just use a lot of listening and viewing guides. So when I say that, I use research guides on our university library's homepage, and I have tutorials that is just one guide of just videos, and I have another guide that is very text heavy with different links of resources to use. And so I really have these pre-recorded videos and content for them to listen to. So a lot of my students, especially my doctoral students, 2 a.m, they have these, papers are due. I can't remember where she said, because I talked to her before, what resources to use, but I know that she had it on her research guide. And I also know that I can go to her videos on our research guides and listen to it again. And it really makes that easier for them. A lot of them download it. Some of them print those research guides and go, oh yeah, she talked about this resource. The next resource I would use after, I'm just going to say JSTOR. The next thing I would use for history might be looking at historical abstracts, because that focuses on world history and so forth. And they just kind of do checklist it. And it really helps, having these thoughtful ways to get through these research questions, but listening and viewing these guides with room for notes, especially even with those graphic organizers and those headings, reflective questions. Where do I want to be? What is my end goal? But if I'm asking someone from the library to help me, what kind of questions do I have ahead of time that will help really have a more fruitful conversation? What do I want from that particular person to help me? Because the professor might have said to have for example, a consultation with that person. And I have students who come in and will say to me, they told me to meet with you, but I don't exactly know why. And then I'm like, oh, what's your project? What are you working on? And they're like, oh yeah, I'm working on this particular project for a class. And it sparked me to remember that a question I did have for my professor, they couldn't answer, because it would be better for you to answer that using these different resources that you have in the library. And really that also cultivates a really good conversation to work not only with the professor who's teaching that class, but also the student to know if they have questions, they can come to me and meet me. And I also do face-to-face as well as Zoom consultations, but it's all just kind of that active listening and what they're looking for. I look a lot about with structured reflection throughout that. I do have students throughout my course. I teach my library 1100 class. At the end of the week, I taught a class online this past semester that was all structured to be asynchronously. So everything was due on Saturday. And I would have them, write a kind of a journal reflection about what they learned that week. And I know the ones that had told me that writing is not their strength. And I hear that a lot from students. I am having difficulty with writing. I feel like this is really difficult for me, even though when they meet with the Writing Center, I have an alternative, and the alternative is videos for them to interact with that too. So even, working through some of those difficulties through the Writing Center also helps as well with their confidence, but using that universal design to really structure that reflection every week. What did they learn from that particular session that they could take away? What's some of the quick takeaways from that session? Because mine could be for the week, I'm teaching them how to use library resources like JSTOR. Why would I use JSTOR? Why would I use library resources versus just typing in keywords on Google? Really having them stop and think about that. Also looking at the readings as well. I'll say, what's some of the readings that really inspired you this week? Writing some questions that maybe you still need the answers to. And I also encourage them, if they have those questions, that to do not only email, but they also send me a video as well if they have any or call me on the phone. But they really oftentimes will be like, oh yeah, I know you talked about this, but I still need clarification for that. I also tried something new this semester that I've never done before, which has been open office hours on Zoom on Friday afternoon. And they actually got extra points for that. So they would come away from the journal activity and think, those are those 3 questions that I had. And this is a great time for me to ask these questions, but I had students come as well and interact with each other. And they've actually found that structured reflection to be really helpful and meaningful conversations that they could actually interact with other people. And so I always think outside of those office hours, outside of those class meetings, how can I interact with them? How can I get them, especially because I don't see them every week. I'm not in a classroom. I don't have the time where that was structured that we're going to meet on Tuesdays at 10 a.m., 10 to 11. And so really they're doing all this work throughout the week. And some of them forget this is even a class. So how can you get them from the get-go to think this class is important as it is for other classes, and really structuring those interactions, because they're not seeing each other. They don't know what each other looks like. And that's why I really have these different opportunities, especially with videos, for them to foster some type of interaction that might look like simulate what you would in the classroom, especially those open Zoom sessions. I use also really opportunities through messaging tools like Marco Polo, Flipgrid. All of that can also be some other powerful technologies and resources. But having that time to break from hearing from other students in a group setting, I know a lot of you all have done that before, but just breaking them down into small groups, one or the other person that you can randomly assign. I know we can in Blackboard, so I'll randomly assign them somebody to work with and do peer review work on an assignment. So that way they'll get different people each time. It's not the same person throughout the semester, and they're actually working with everybody in the course by the time the semester ends. And so they're more likely to kind of get to know each other, and they may have them in a different class as well. A reflection question for you all might be, do your classes typically include instructor or student-led group conversations? What does that look like for you all? And what is the most successful when you have those student-to-student conversations that you come away with? So just kind of think about how you're doing that throughout the semester. Like I said, I really love these text and video annotation tools. I think a lot of times we're not using them as much. When I'm using especially something like PlayPosit, which we have within our Blackboard, where I can actually upload my lecture. And so when I do that at different points, like 0.25, I'll ask a question. I'll say, are you understanding the material? So making like a poll can say yes or no, or I can say stop, and then they will have to think about the question that's on the screen. And then at the end, I have them do that reflection piece of what you learned, what some outcomes you can come away with. But I'm also using some of these other technology tools that you can also use for say book chapters in a book or an article, and they can kind of timestamp that and say, this is a quote that I want to talk about in class with my other classmates, or do assignments around that. But I really like that kind of intentional thinking piece of that. The hardest part, oftentimes is when we have these large group asynchronous instructions. That is probably the one thing that you're not seeing them as much or at all. So how can we still have this participation besides just having discussion boards? And so for me, I feel like when I was a graduate student, I was actually teaching a 200 level history class, and I had about 120 students in the class. And as a graduate student, I learned a lot because, first of all, I didn't realize that I would be, having to do so much interactive work with those discussion board posts, because they actually had to go ahead and respond to 2 people. And that wasn't practical for me. It was very laborious for me, and that wasn't great for them. So I learned quickly on the spot that I needed to change the way I do large group interactions online. And so by giving them a different variety of ways to interact with them. I've done this class in so many different ways. I try new things every semester. I've done it to where that they have to come on Tuesdays from 8 to 10, but you're not, that's not in their schedule for you all to do that for the class, even if it's an online class. And they've had online interactions that way, that we'll talk about something. I've done the flipped model instruction that they will come away, they've done all the readings before. And so that way they'll come away with, hey, this is what I learned, XYZ from your lecture ahead of time. I've listened to that. I still have these questions. Let's talk about it in Zoom. So there's so many different ways that I've tried to really think about these large group interactions, because it can be very difficult. And oftentimes it is coming up with these videos. And so that way you can also control that it's not just one person who is dominating the conversation, but everybody is encouraged as well to talk about whatever it is that you're wanting to talk about for that discussion for the day. I like to use Think, Pair, Share. I know a lot of people use that in the classroom, but I like to do that online as well. If you're using a small group discussion board for several days a week, you might want to think about using Think, Pair, Share. So that way they can discuss that in kind of smaller groups and like one person you have that assigned to, really to think about more of that to being more effective that way as well going forward. So that with those assigned roles, I actually have students who in these large groups, or even just say you have somebody who's the leader and you have two other people who are in the group. I also have them assign roles to each other. Somebody could be the person who's taking notes. I have somebody who is leading the discussion and moderating that. For me, one example would be if you have one discussion forum, could be a message board, could be video. 1/4 of the students in the course could look up at the post about the current events that are happening, whatever it is that you're, working on for your content that's relevant to the unit. 1/4 of those students could ask questions about the original post if you have a discussion board posts, and 1/4 of those students could point out those connections between the course content and the student posts, as well as 1/4 of the students could be assigned to write up summaries of those original posts. And then that has more of a discussion. So everybody has a goal, everybody has a plan on which part of the 1/4 they're going to take responsibility for. It's really that free engagement at any level. Anybody would be able to contribute, but they would have a plan going into it. They would know how to interact, and those roles can actually change. If one person say they don't want to lead the discussion, they might be the person who's pointing out those connections between the course content. So having them change roles every single time can also help if you're doing just discussion board posts and want to find a different way to do that. I also do kind of a digital fishbowl activities. I've done that face-to-face as well. And really, taking those online classes that they will have just a discussion. They will go ahead and pick out a topic out of a fishbowl, and that's going to be our discussion for the week. It's all based on the content that we're discussing, but I also will get students who will put in different thoughts or ideas for us to have with online discussions. And so we'll discuss that for our fishbowl activity time after the session has concluded as well. And so it's really, however you feel like you want to interact with your students, whether that is going to be a course that you have that is going to be fully online or face-to-face or asynchronous, synchronous, however you want to set that up. But there is ways to do that in different ways that are meaningful to what your students, and having that conversation. I love to use polls throughout my lectures and my time. I like to know what they're thinking at that time, if that's helpful. I like to do poll anywhere. So that way I'm like, okay, so what's, did you understand the lecture from last week? They'll say yes, they'll say no. Or, what was some of the, I'll put a couple ideas on the top 3 things they learned from this week. And they'll go, oh yeah, we learned the best from finding articles in the library. And everybody felt good about that. So just polling them and really understanding what works for them, what hasn't worked for them, that actually helps me with a pre-assessment every time I teach, because then I know what they're still, what they really achieved that past week, what they know, what they don't know, what they still need clarification on. And if it's something that I still feel like they don't know, we'll go back and revisit that for a few minutes, and then we'll go on to the next part of the lecture. But I want them to be able to tell me if this is what they're learning, not learning throughout the session. Again, it's all those tools that we talked about, again, with those, dividing those tools into small groups, interactive activities. We've talked a little bit about that, and really having those larger discussions and subgroups into smaller groups. Again, I love having that trust circle and conversations, having a consulting group if you're wanting those private discussions and issues as well, making sure you have different perspectives each time, ideas, fresh new ideas, coming up with new things for them. Those student to self is one thing that I have also found with conversations, is that, you have students who are working with each other as well as working with faculty, but how are they retaining that information after the conversation has ended? You can have a journal. You can have them keep a journal on things that they've learned in the class. Could be paper, it could be a Word document. Having them rewatch videos. I've had them do that before a big tests, for example, or a big quiz that we have. That student to student content allows them to have think time between the sessions, and they can also I feel like reflection has been really helpful, because a lot of times, we go pretty fast in our course each week and we're learning something new, but having that time for them to think themselves. It can be graded, it can be not graded. Oftentimes it can be one of those, checks for understanding. You just go ahead and that's a completion grade. However you want to do that, I just think it's really helpful to have that think time before each unit, talking about their prior experiences. Maybe this is not just a class that they're struggling with, but they're also having issues that kind of bleeds into the class to another class that's similar. Again, I've had students here in my class who have had issues with taking notes. That's a really good example. And they're thinking that when I go through my biology class that I'm taking, it is going by so fast that everything the professor's talking about is just going over my head. What is some ways that I can come away with not just writing down everything from the PowerPoint that the professor is saying? What is some other ways that I can come up with? And that student to self is that reflection piece of that, those outcomes, still looking, for other ways to have conversations with the professor outside of class. I've had students, tape their sessions if the professor allows that. And just there's a lot of different ways, but having that reflection after every class, because I know students who I work with that, 5 minutes after the class is over, they'll just have this reflection time. This is what I've learned in the class today. This is what I still need clarification on. And then they'll go to their next class. But I do actually work that into my class that I teach, because I want them to have think time. And I feel like that journal opportunity is very important every single time. Just having them have that pause and reflect 10 minutes of class, write down what you learned. What was the purpose of learning that material? And that really does help. And those pre-unit reflections, just uncovering any of that previous knowledge, things that could be biased, possibly or potentially biased. I work a lot with that with the research process, especially in my class, and just having an opportunity to think about things before jumping into the instruction at large. And it really gives them a lot of times to stay through that challenging opportunities and the group work, as well as, I know group work can be frustrating. That's another thing that I get with a lot of student to student conversations is I'm not understanding why we do group work. Why are we doing that? How much group work is it going to be for the class? Everybody needs a role. I've learned time and time again that people have to have a role in group work, and they have to be accountable for that, because I know that I've gone that through in my life where we've had students who just do all the work and no one else was contributing. But I do break that down into who is doing what and why. I do that before I have a major assignment. I meet with each group and I'm like, what is your role? What is this person going to do for the research process or the project they're working on? Everybody has to have a role by the time that they come away from that particular breakout room. Because I'll do a breakout room in Zoom. They'll have 3 people. They're all going to meet together. How is that going to work? How is that going to, when are you going to meet again? Is it only going to be in breakout rooms when you come to class, or are you going to do some work outside of class? Everybody has to have a role, and that reflection piece is also really important. How are they going to contribute that once they leave that breakout room? and hopefully that those conversations will continue as well. Sometimes we do a portfolio reflection, and that's just a collection of their work from the semester, and that's going to be a presentation. That can be a video presentation, that can be a PowerPoint presentation. I've had students come in, and really what I liked at my past job is I had a student do a graphic novel of how they've come away with the research process from that class, all the topics that they've learned, but they put it into a graphic novel format about how to work with, how this might work for somebody else taking the class or the research process. So I found that piece to be also really helpful during time. The end of the unit is that growth period, that courses, that learning objectives as well. And so again, those reflection pieces are what kinds of students' interaction from this page or even article are most important to you? Are there different kinds of interaction that you'd like to increase? What tools have you used for online learning? So we're going to jump right into Play Pose It. This is my example. And if you'd like a copy of this, I'm happy to kind of show you that link. But where do we begin if we're using something like Play Pose It? Composing that 2 to 3 sentences through those prompted questions. I do purpose, response, word count, and formatting. Some of them, I have to get them with the ground running with APA, MLA, and just getting them to know this basic citation, especially if they're quoting something from a different source. And really that purpose I find is the why behind that. Why are we asking them to be responding, and how should they respond in terms of being professional? And really not, and viewing them, I tell my students that these, your students in the class are your future colleagues. Let's really think about them in that professional way. Let's have that professional tone we have with them rather than just regular people on the street that we're working with. Let's develop these professional conversation skills to help benefit them in the future, because that's really going to make a huge difference. I use a lot of purpose as well as achieving that goal. I have them think about those academic colleagues, who they are, what the purpose is. I also have students look at grammar and revisionary with our writing center and writing resources, so that they're not just having a bunch of slang language that I don't understand. Oftentimes they'll have acronyms that I have no idea what that means, but they do. And so I'm like, let's think about this, how you would talk about to somebody professionally. Let's write professionally. And if you don't know how to do that yet, that's totally fine. We can work on those skills, not only in class, but also look at that for our writing center and resources that might help. This is my example of what I use in Play Pose It. I would have them do the engagement section and really, what do you know about the term information expansion? We actually talk about that throughout the class. And they would have smaller groups that they work with. They talk about the term, what is information expansion? Somebody might say, tag Sophie in it and say, hey, Sophie, that's a great idea. I believe the term information anxiety or information expansion, either term we're going to talk about that week. And so they might say information anxiety, we have too much of that information at once every single day. I'm overwhelmed with social media, other news outlets. How are you accessing and retaining information from your courses? And also, how are you deciding what news is valid and why? What's some of your experiences that you might be having that might be helpful to me? Having that professional work and that professional tone, I think, is also really helpful for students, because oftentimes they don't know how to have those conversations. So let's start now. I also do, for my assessment purposes with Play Pose It, it tells me the data on students. If they've completed it in an hour, how long did they complete it? Did they complete this in 9 hours? Who knows what they were doing at that point? It's it's only a 1 hour class I teach. So it's interesting to see how long they're spending on material or where they're hung up on, if they're getting the right answers or not, or if they're not started at all. So I can actually tell who has not done their work for that week and reach out to them and have conversations with them. So it's a really good assessment tool as well. I always use the who, what, where, and when. Who am I addressing? For my students, I say, who are you addressing right now? Are you addressing me as the professor, or are you addressing someone in the class? Again, professionalism. What is being discussed? What is the topic of the week? What did I learn? How can someone else help me? Where am I right now? I do that a lot of students. I'm like, where are you? Are you in the classroom? Are you having a conversation on the street with somebody. Think about formality and problem solving, the due dates, planning ahead, not rushing through, but having thoughtful answers and conversations. Like I said, I love to have weekly cafes with my students, Zoom rooms. And I'm going to show you some Jamboards that I use with that in just a second. But I have a Zoom room, a conversation, a cafe with them. I back up points from the lectures and the readings, give them extra points, or this can be built in as a course grade. So each week they would have a cafe conversation, just like maybe, for example, we were at a Starbucks, or in our classroom, we're having a weekly cafe with some coffee. And I'm telling them, like, maybe, for example, Jose is working with another student, and Jose might say, I'm learning about information anxiety. And so maybe I have another friend who's struggling with understanding the differences between popular and scholarly resources for my class. My friend just Googles everything. And I feel like that's a problem, but how can we help him be better? How can we help him find those resources? And then when they do that, they'll start to think, oh yeah, that applies to the class that we've worked on. If my friend has that conversation, how can I help him? How can I have additional conversations with that? Let's put all this information together. And I use a Foursquare activity using Jamboard. So I'm going to show you how I do that with those conversational cafes. So we have our prompt, we have our problem, we have our issue that is happening for the course. I'm going to say, for example, if I have Juan and Justin have been assigned to create a presentation on procedures, could be, this is fictional, could be breeding cattle in their animal class, and they haven't found much information about it. How are they going to come to find reliable sources or in-depth research for their classes? What can you do to help them if they're both struggling with that? If you hear that conversation, or they come up to you maybe in the dorms and have this, hey, I'm not sure what to do. And so what I do is I put them in those breakout rooms, oftentimes with 4 different people, depending on sizes. Every class, they actually work on this for 20 minutes, and then they reconvene as a full class, and they actually talk about their results and their findings, what ways have been successful. And I'll show you what that Jamboard kind of looks like. And I'm just facilitating. I'll go around to each group and different breakout rooms, what they're, just hearing what they're saying as well. And we do record them oftentimes, because people do want to go back into and go, oh yeah, I remember with so-and-so, they talked about this, and they do agree to the terms of having that recorded. But it does allow them to know each other, and they actually have somebody in the role that will present that information. And then somebody will actually take kind of the questions that are in the chat, but it really actually helps them being active and being present. When I'm working with them, they can have text on the Jamboard, they can have pictures, they can have words, anything that might help them solve that particular problem. And I'll show you in a second at that kind of whiteboard what that looks like. But if you haven't used Jamboard before, it's really great. It's a free app. You can draw, post images, videos, organize your content. And really, it's a good way to scaffold them and this prompting those questions as a whole. So this is kind of one way to kind of look at that. We talked a little bit about that, but this is my visual example. So I have their problem, what they're trying to solve for the class. They might say, okay, after I have this problem, what would you say to Juan and Justin about their search methodology? They'd put more sticky notes on that and say how they would respond to that. Next, a question we're going to go to is, what kind of sources have we talked about in class that you would recommend to Juan and Justin? How would you advise them to evaluate those resources and information and really be accurate and complete? And then you just go around those little 4 notes. What's important is the main prompt. How are they going to go from point A to point B to C and D? Depending on how you want to go, it could be up and down, however you'd like to do that. But I've found them going from A to B, C, and D have been really helpful, because they actually have to figure out, based on the lecture, the things that we've talked about in class. This can be a flipped instruction, or it can be after the instruction that you've given them. How are they going to solve that particular query, and then using the information that you had for the class? Again, it's that kind of structuring that small group work. Everybody's accountable. It actually facilitates more of a conversation. They could draw, they like putting different colors, they like putting pictures. And I'm like, hey, what does that picture of that cow have to do with that, with the prompt? and they'll go, oh, this is how the connection I made that, or I draw this particular picture. Oh, this means this. For me, in our group corresponds this with finding resources, but they've been like really creative and they save their boards. We keep them throughout the semester on our Blackboard site. So it's just finding those images, anything that they want to use. We talk about Creative Commons, using freely available resources throughout the year as well. But it's a good way for them to express how they're feeling about the course material. It gives them a really good visual if they're not going to just type everything in there, but they will actually present that and go, this is what this means. This is what this GIF means, or this meme means for this particular conversation. It could be a meme of somebody just being frustrated. I'm frustrated because I can't figure out how to find that information, but I had the aha moment of a exclamation point because I learned in this class to find information critically and fairly, and how I'm doing that. But it really facilitates great conversations. And this is another example of what mine looks like with working with students. They had somebody who was like, oh yeah, I'm going to avoid these resources that somebody's trying to sell you. Because again, we talk about that, the paywalled versions, or, things that are biased as well. And are they trying to sell you some type of product? Or is it going to be an actual research article versus a popular magazine? So this person had this picture of somebody with a money symbol. That's what that meant to them. Academic articles, or, what about reliable resources? I'll use the university libraries databases, but these are things that students have put on their little boards. Again, they can do however they would want to. But this Jamboard activity, I have a QR code for that if you just kind of want to see that more in action in real time. But coming away with today is just having more active versus passive learning, connecting topics to real world problems, or facing that in your classroom connections, encouraging them to be thoughtful, not rushed, balancing professional and personal hats, and techniques that might help you throughout your course. Again, my name is Amy Dye Reeves. This is my email and my phone number. And I know we went over a lot of things at one time, and I hope that you found this to be valuable today. And please reach out to me with any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if anybody has any questions for me.
No, that was actually a pretty good presentation, Amy. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
The only question I had, I was wondering, many of the courses we develop, I'm an instructional designer for online education at Pima Community College in Arizona. And one of the things that could we start off the first introduction, we had all this good social stuff going on.
Yes.
But then that's it. It fails after that, because then the discussions are all kind of academic related. And that was the problem I was thinking about when you mentioned this, but you gave me a lot of really good ideas to keep that social process going on. Because I never thought about it until now, but that's what happens. That's it. Sometimes maybe the social process comes again at the end when there's a discussion for reflection, but then between the first day and the last day, it's just all academic and it's tough. So I took some notes here. So hopefully I can implement some of these in my classes that I designed with other faculty members. But this was a really great presentation. I'm glad I attended, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. And I hope this gave everybody some ideas on where to go next, or just different things to facilitate conversations. Because, like you said, I feel like working with students that especially with discussion board posts, I have found that they just zone out really quickly and they're disengaged. Just finding new ways to get them involved, I think, is really important.
Right. All right, well, that's all I got. I appreciate it. So
yeah, thank you so much. Does anybody else have any questions for me today? If not, that's totally fine. So I'm happy to help any way I can.
I think it's lunchtime for some folks.
All right. Yeah, that sounds good. I know it's here it's 11:50. So yep, getting close.
Well, Amy, I thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you
so much. You've got
another
one for us, right?
I do, yes. Next week, I believe I have one. It's going to be about ADA compliancy and graphic syllabi.
Yeah, great.
Yes.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, thank you so much.